Hi, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our next unit we're going to be talking about is all about respiration. So just like we always start off, we'll be looking a little bit at the pathway, the structure and function, the breathing mechanism, and then finally probably the most complicated part is the gas, the pathway that the gas takes going from the lung to the cell, and then from the cell back out through the lungs again. So let's look at the main idea here. What we're looking for is why do we breathe? And the whole function or the whole reason why we breathe is to get air into our lungs, which will eventually get the air into our cells. So we want to bring in gas, and more specifically we want to bring in that oxygen, and we also need to get rid of the gassed waste. And so that's our CO2. So the whole reason why we're doing the breathing mechanism is to bring in oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. We really want to look at structure and function. So when we look at the pathway, what structure does and what structures look like, and then as a result of their appearance, what their function is. So again, when we're looking at things that have a lot of surface area, the reason why we have a lot of surface area is so we can have more reactions taking place. So let's talk about this now. So here's our cellular respiration. We know that we had glucose that's coming from our digestive system. We have oxygen coming from our respiratory system. And what happens is it produces water, carbon dioxide, and we finally get our energy. So this needs to go somewhere. So why oxygen in? Like we were just talking about, the reason why we need oxygen is used in cellular respiration. Mixes with glucose, and this provides us with ATP energy, which is the better source of energy than glucose because it's a little bit smaller. Why CO2 out? CO2, carbon dioxide, is a waste product. And we want to get waste products out of our system. Okay, so we have three types of respiration. We have external, internal, and then cellular respiration, which we've talked about this before. So external is the exchange of gases between the blood vessels and the alveoli of the lungs. So alveoli of lungs, which we'll talk about what those are in a few minutes, and the blood vessels. Internal respiration is where those blood vessels, gas exchange, between blood vessels and the cells of the body. So that blood brought those gases to the cells and then also away from the cells. And then cellular respiration, this takes place in the mitochondria of cells. And don't forget, this is where we have our glucose reacting with our oxygen in order to produce CO2 and water. And ultimately what we want is our ATP energy. So let's take a look at the pathway. We have two parts. We have the upper tract and the lower tract. What we're looking at here, all we really want to know is we're looking for our nasal cavity. We're looking at our oral cavity. You don't have to use the fancy words for it. Epiglottis, which is the little flap, which we'll get into a little bit, that covers the hole into our lungs. We have our larynx, trachea, alveoli, bronchi. Those are all that we need to know. But let's look at this mechanism now, the pathway. So we have our nasal and our oral cavity. The whole point of this are the following things. These three. So this is what's happening in the nasal and oral cavity. The air that's coming in needs to be cleaned. Oh my goodness. So it needs to be So air apparently gets 2 A's today. So air, it needs to be cleaned, warmed, and moistened. The way that it's cleaned is through cilia and mucus. So what mucus does is it traps particles that are coming in, and the cilia sweeps it. Okay, and we also have longer hairs as well that will help to prevent things from coming in. It also warms, so we have blood vessels in our nose, as people know when it gets cold and their nose gets irritated and dried out. Those blood vessels rupture, and then that's when you get the nosebleeds. So these blood vessels with the warm blood flowing through it will actually warm the air. And the last one with the mucus in our nose and our mouth, it will moisten the air. Okay, so we're entering here and here. So next one, the pharynx. This contains the tonsils. We won't get into much about the tonsils. All you really need to know that they participate in immune response. And their exact function is kind of debated. Some doctors and specialists find them to be very useful in their ability to fight infections, and some think that they contribute more to the infections, and that's why they end up being removed, because they continue to flare up in immune response. So that's all you need to know about the tonsils. We'll be talking about a little bit more in the lymphatic system when we get there. We have our glottis. What all this means is just the opening. Okay, and we have our epiglottis. Oops. And we have our epiglottis, and this is the flap of skin which will close when we swallow in order to prevent things from any food particles from going down our air pipe. So covers the glottis, and then what we have here on the sides are our vocal cords. And we'll talk about that in a second. Actually, we'll talk about it right now. So here's our vocal cords. This is what provides the pitch. So if the vocal cords are tight, when the muscles contract, it makes a higher pitch. And if they're loose, it's going to be a lower pitch. Okay, so let's take a little peek. Hopefully this works all right. Keep. And we just have a nice disgusting video on what the vocal cords look like. So these are the vocal cords here. It's a little laggy, but you can see that they're producing the pitch. Okay. All right, so trachea. So this is the continuum of the pathway. Our air is going down our trachea, which is just going to be pretty much we just consider it our air tube. The important things is that these are rings of cartilage, and this is going to provide support and also protection. So if we had something as soft as our esophagus, where there's not cartilage, it's able to collapse and it's harder for air to move through. So this provides some structure / support and protection. Oops. And this cartilage comes all the way down into the bronchi, which we'll see in the next slide. But also want to mention there's these cells which are called goblet cells in the epithelial tissue, which just means the outer layer. And this is where this mucus is actually produced. Here's our cilia. So same functions. We have it trapping with the mucus and sweep away, which we actually sweep up our throat or up our windpipe, and then it goes into our oral cavity where we swallow it. So sweep with the cilia. So bronchi, all it means is just a branch. Each of them are called a bronchus. And it's going to continually to branch further and further down. And this is just the pathway of the wind. So these are paired tubes. Singular is bronchus. And they branch down into secondary bronchi, which they finally branch into bronchioles. And the lower that they get, or the more branched they get, the thinner the walls get, till eventually they branch out into these things called alveoli, which are really thin sacs that facilitate gas exchange. So these are the thin sacs that facilitate gas exchange, which means it allows gases to pass from the lungs into the blood. Okay, the last thing we're going to finish with is the functions of these alveoli, more importantly the structure that allows it to have its specific functions. So if we look at the grape clusters, there's a lot of them bunched close together. This increases the surface area for maximum diffusion between carbon dioxide and oxygen. They're thin-walled, which also maximizes the diffusion rate, how fast they are, because it's nice and thin. They're dense with capillaries, which means since there's a lot of capillaries, there's lots of places for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to exchange, so it increases the gas exchange. There's stuff called pulmonary surfactant, which is a lipid protein base, which allows the lungs to not deflate. So it increases the amount of, it lowers the amount of surface tension. So it lowers the surface tension. And it does this because this lipid protein has two ends. It has a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic end. So the hydrophilic is going to be facing the water. The hydrophobic is going to be facing the air. And so it allows it to almost push off of the two layers, which will lower the surface tension. So we can talk about that a little bit more in class too if you want to see some more visuals before we run out of time. And last two, moist walls will help aid in diffusion because something can't diffuse from one area to the next unless there's water there, some sort of solvent. And the last one is stretch receptors to make sure that the air in the lungs don't overfill. It prevents overfilling by telling that it's done. Okay, so the last things to finish off, the summary is just, again, making sure we know why we breathe. Next one is making sure you know the pathway, structure, and function. And you can probably guarantee that there's going to be something on the structure function of the alveoli. So a little something to leave you with there with old Darth getting some a little remedy for his sore throat. Okay, so don't forget, fill in the comment if you have any comments on what you saw here, and also make sure you come with at least 1 or 2 questions for class tomorrow. And that's it. Hope it helps.